Welcome to Finding Hope After the Death of a Sibling, a webinar tonight that is brought to you by the Compassionate Friends and the Open to Hope Foundation. This webinar tonight we hope will help you. We have some very special guests, and our host tonight is Dr. Heidi Horsley, a dear friend of the Compassionate Friends, a dear friend of mine, and the Executive Director of the Open to Hope Foundation. Well, Heidi, you know, I think we have a wonderful partnership, Open to Hope, and of course you're the Executive Director there. I'm the Executive Director of the Compassionate Friends, and we've just come together. We want to create some really good grief information for people who just want to learn more about the grieving process. And what I like so much about tonight's webinar is that the three of you, not only do you talk the talk, but you walk the walk. All three of you tonight are bereaved siblings.
Thanks, Alan, and this is Heidi Horsley, and I want to introduce our two guests tonight, Alicia Franklin and Tracy Milne. Alicia, who is also known as Allie, is a bereaved sibling. She's a licensed clinical social worker and grief management specialist. Allie designed the pediatric social work program for Wilford Hall Medical Center and has designed an award-winning self-help model for children's grief support programs that have been implemented nationwide. Since the age of 13, she has spoken worldwide on children in grief. She has presented many times at the Compassionate Friends and has done a lot of workshops and facilitated support groups. So welcome, Allie. The next person I want to introduce is Tracy Milne. Tracy was 15 when her 10-year-old brother Andrew was killed in a skateboarding accident. She attended her first Compassionate Friends National Conference 4 months later and became a member of a local chapter. Along with presenting numerous workshops for siblings, Tracy enjoys being actively involved in the Compassionate Friends Sibling Program. She is currently serving her second term as a sibling representative for the Compassionate Friends National Board of Directors, and I am honored to also serve with her on the Compassionate Friends Board of Directors. Welcome to the webinar, Allie and Tracy. It's great to have you guys here.
Thank you so much, Heidi, for having us. We're thrilled to be here. This is Allie, and I'm personally so excited that we have a webinar on this subject. This is like talking about who am I now, and for those siblings who are on this webinar, I hope that this matches the experience that you're having and validates a little bit about where you're coming from. That one of the big pieces about having a sibling die is asking the question of who am I now and how do I fit into this picture. My brother was my only sibling, and so there was a big question about how many brothers and sisters do you have, and how do you answer that question? And it really came down to having to figure out for myself that I am still a sister and I do have a brother, and then how do I answer that question to people in a way that honors my brother's life, but also gives me the opportunity to talk or not talk as much as I need to with that person. I thought for just a moment, Tracy and I would share a little bit about what brought us to this work, and that is a little bit of our story. My only sibling, Austin, died 39 years ago, and we were a military family, so we moved almost every year of my childhood, so quite literally every year there were the questions about how many brothers and sisters do you have, and when I would say I have a brother, then it was quickly, well, what grade is he in, and maybe he goes to school with my siblings, and so I struggled for years with trying to figure out who am I and how do I fit in this family. Do I need to walk in his shoes? Do I need to do the things that he would have done so that my parents would have the experience of having both of us? And how did I fit in that picture? And it took a lot of time and work to figure out and to get to where I am today. But I can very proudly say that I am still a sister, and that my brother is a part of my life. And I try to work every day to live the legacy of being his big sister. Tracy, you want to share a little bit about your experience?
Absolutely. My brother Andrew died 29 years ago. He was 10 at the time, and I was 15, and I was in the middle of the high school years. So when it came to who am I now, I didn't have as many issues as far as moving around and people reintroducing myself, with the question of how many brothers or sisters do you have. I had the proverbial stamp on there must be something wrong with her because her brother died and she's crying. So I had to answer who I am now became more of what do I do now? Because I don't know who this person is, because now I became this person whose younger brother has died. I'm now an only child. I spent 10 years of my life sharing things, and now I have nothing and no one to share with. So my response to the who I am now was different yet the same, because once again, like Allie, he was my only brother. So suddenly I was the only child in the house. So there was a lot of focus from my parents on me, and there was a lot of pressure on me. And at the same time, I didn't know what to do because I no longer had a sibling. So am I a sister? Am I not a sister? It was a great foundation for Allie and I to connect on. We had a lot of similarities in our situations at that time.
And this is such an important topic, like you guys are saying. Who am I now? What is my identity? And we actually have a question about this, and it's from Cindy, and she says, I am a parent who lost a 6-year-old. I have a surviving child who is now 11. I was wondering if the webinar could speak to the concept of siblings who lose their only brother or sister at a young age and have to go through life as if they are an only child.
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. I'm so glad that someone asked. I was 4 when my brother died, and so I can really speak to this from personal experience, that one of the things that particularly young children experience with the death of anyone is that they have different understandings. Children have a different understanding about death through different ages in their life. So young children may not understand the permanence of death, and as kids get older, they understand more and more about what it really means when someone dies. And so what happens is we often see children grieving and re-grieving and even having moments that look like it's brand new loss to them as they develop a new understanding. When I thought that my brother was away in heaven and couldn't understand why he wasn't coming back, because any other time someone goes away, they usually come back or they correspond with you or something else. That was a different loss that I was experiencing than when it became very clear to me that this was a permanent thing. And all of a sudden it was like having this loss all over again in a different way. And then what I will tell you is that as I went away to college, as I prepared to leave the nest, if you will, all of a sudden it came back up again for our family because I'm the oldest child. I shouldn't have been the last one leaving the nest at the same time. And so our family grieved again the death of my brother and had to figure out, what does this mean for us, and how are we all going to interact with each other? Because we knew I was going to be the first one walking out the door, but I don't think anyone was prepared for what an impact it would have on us when I was the last one walking out the door.
And Allie, you wrote a book about this called Am I Still a Sister, right?
Yes. So this book they're letters that I wrote to my brother because, to be honest, my parents were wonderful and they were supportive, but they were going through their own loss and their own grief experience. And sometimes we couldn't really talk to each other about it. Sometimes it felt like we were speaking a completely different language. And my sibling was the one person who understood my parents the same way that I did. And he was actually the person I really would have wanted to talk to about dealing with this awful thing that happened in my life. And he was gone. And I will tell you that as I've hit another milestone, so we had the death of a parent this year, I grieved for him again, because as I'm putting together the funeral, as I'm trying to figure out what to do in the death of my mother, this was a moment when I would have had my sibling right next to me. And so literally for a lifetime, this death of a sibling keeps coming back up, that he would have been the person, it would have been the two of us together planning a funeral, the two of us trying to figure out how to take care of our dad and figure out what to do next.
So Allie, yeah, it's interesting how this the losses of our brothers keep coming up, and I'm sure that Tracy can relate to that.
Absolutely. I was 15 at the time, excuse me, when my brother died. We had a 5-year age difference between us. So I had a lot of those early high school years to deal with as far as the death went and the time frame of everything. I find now as an adult and when I got into my college years, meeting people, that's when I started to deal with something Allie had mentioned earlier, which was those proverbial questions of how many brothers and sisters do you have? For some reason, throughout the different stages of my life, every time someone asked me that question, I had a different answer. Sometimes I didn't want to share with them any information about my brother. I wanted to keep it personal. I felt it was too invasive. Other times I wanted to shout it from the rooftop, and I didn't care if it made them uncomfortable. I wanted people to know that he lived. And other times I just stood there like a deer in the headlights and didn't know what to say. So there were definitely different phases throughout my life. Growing up suddenly as this only child, suddenly as this person who had all the focus and all the pressures from the parents and the family and the expectations that they unknowingly put on you. And trust me, for the parents that are listening, you don't know you're doing it, and we love you for it, but you are. And it's just something that happens. It's a part of the process, and it's of something that we as the surviving siblings now deal with. I know that for me, there was a big issue of the balance between what would my brother have done and what should I do. And that was something I struggled with for many, many years in my early teenage years, especially because my brother was an avid sports fan. And I felt as though that was something he would have carried on. So I tried to do it to appease my parents to go to a softball game or a soccer game or whatever it was. There's definitely a new stigma, I think, that maybe we even put upon ourselves partially when we become an only sibling, because now that share mode, that attention, everything that was split 50-50 is totally on you now.
There is this fear, and there was this, nothing, you need to be really careful because you're our only child that's left. And there was this piece about wanting to be a little overprotective and say, I'm scared to let you walk out the door. And yet, this understanding, at least on my parents' part, that I have to let you walk out the door. But there was a lot more checking in and a lot more call as soon as you get there that happened in my house after my brother died than before. And I understood it. And what was really interesting was then when I became a teenager and my mom was late for something, this was back before cell phones, and she hadn't called me to tell me that she was going to be more than an hour late. And when she walked in the door, I was saying, "Where have you been? I was calling the hospital." One of the things we hear from sibs a lot, and I experienced it too, is that people, well-meaning folks, will come up and say, "So how are your parents doing?" And it can leave this sense of, well, okay, so my parents are struggling or my parents are having a hard time, but then there's not the next question about, and how are you doing? And this sense of maybe that your loss or that the grief that you're going through is somehow secondary or somehow less than parent grief can really be hard for siblings, because the fact is that siblings have different relationships with one another than parents and children do, and it's all difficult. And when we hold yardsticks up to compare hurt between whether it's a parent having lost a child or a sibling having had a sibling die, it's all too much to handle alone. And so that's where sometimes siblings feel left out, or as a second-class griever, maybe is the right way to say that.
I heard a sibling say once, the worst loss that can ever happen to you is the one that's kicked you to the ground, the one that you don't know how you're going to survive. It's horrible to lose a child. It's horrible to lose a sibling. We shouldn't get into those comparisons of which loss is worse.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that parents sometimes will say, well, I help my child who's a surviving sibling, to ask, how are you doing? To avoid saying your grief, avoid giving messages that say your grief is somehow less than mine, just to say, I know you're having a hard time. I know that this is really difficult for you. Or when you're among people and someone says to the child, oh, are you taking good care of your parents, or how are your parents doing, that as a parent you can speak up and say, you know, it's really hard to have a sibling die too. And, you know, I've seen, you know, so-and-so having a hard time, and we're really struggling together as a family, to be a voice for that surviving sibling.
And when my brother first died, my father's career was one that it put him in the spotlight often in our local community. So after my brother's death, there was a lot of people that came to run into my parents in the grocery store, the bank, whatever it was, and, you know, would ask, you know, how are you, you know, how are things, et cetera. And then when they see me, you got the proverbial, how are your parents doing? Oh, I saw your mom the other day. She seems as though she's getting along well, and, you know, random questions like that. And I would just stand there and not say much of anything, try to be polite, answer their questions, and go about my business. I find now, 29 years down the road, people will come to me and say, it's so nice that you do what you do with compassionate friends. Your parents must be so proud. And they still, in their roundabout way, can't actually look me in the eye and say, how are you doing? You must really miss your brother. They still somehow turn it all around into, I'm doing something nice for my parents because my parents lost a child.
We have a lot of questions. One is, any thoughts on losing an identical twin to suicide? There's a lot of stuff on twinless twins and a lot of resources. There's a book called Age by Elizabeth DeVita Rayburn. It's called The Empty Room, Losing a Sibling at Any Age, and she has a great chapter on twinless twins. And, you know, sibling loss is very difficult, and I know with twins, it's difficult because you come into this world together. And so sometimes siblings that are twins that have lost a twin say it's almost like, you know, a limb, severing a limb. You feel like you should be leaving this world together. And there's also an organization called Twinless Twins if you want to get involved with that, which twins have found very, very helpful.
When we're talking about having someone die by suicide, I think it's really important also to find some support around that, because sometimes people that you're talking to may have a hard time with the fact that the death was by suicide. And so finding a support system, and by the way, the Sounds of the Sibling is a great support system on Facebook, and I just love connecting with siblings there, so that's a good place for sibs to go, where people have had siblings die in all kinds of different ways. But finding folks who can be there and support you even though the death was by suicide, because when people are giving messages like, you know, asking questions that can be really hurtful, there's almost like an extra stigma around death by suicide. And so finding support that says, you know, I can be there for you through this difficult time and through the hard questions that folks ask themselves anytime there's been a death by suicide is really important.
And Tracy, can you tell everybody about the Compassionate Friends Facebook page, which you run and moderate, facilitate?
Sure. It's actually called the Compassionate Friends Sounds of the Siblings, and it is all spelled out like that, unfortunately. Sorry. But basically what that is a webpage that was started by myself and two other siblings from TCF, because we needed a safe space to go and to chat and to vent and to ask questions and tell stories, and we didn't want any parents involved. And we understand social media, you know, is not as controlled as we would like it to be, so we decided to make a page and control it. So the only people that are members of that group are bereaved siblings. They may be 15 years old, they may be 65 years old, but they are all bereaved siblings, just strictly for the sense of making sure that there's no one in there that is maybe, you know, how do I say it, a parent? Yes. So, and then you join this group. We have 635 members as of today on this page, in this group, and they are from all over the country, even across the pond in the UK, and they have brothers and sisters that have died from thousands and thousands of causes and reasons, some as most recent as 2 months ago. And then there's people like Allie and I on there that are 20, 30 plus years. It's a fabulous, fabulous resource, and it also connects you with people that have other resources in other areas of sibling loss.
We have another question that says, I had lost my parents during childhood and my only sibling, my brother, in November of 2013. Do you think my previous loss should be helpful in my most recent one?
What I'll say is yes and no, both exactly at the same time. And that's the thing about grief, is it's messy, right? It would be wonderful if it fit into nice, neat little categories, but the fact is that it doesn't. On one hand, when my mom died this year, I knew what to expect about grief because of my experience of dealing with the death of my brother. I kind of knew what was coming. I wasn't caught by surprise when the shock wore off and the hurt started to come in. On the other hand, what can happen is what I would call a layering of losses, or sort of the sense that, why does this keep happening? Or it feels like lots of people in my life who I love and care about have died, and now I feel like I could really, like, it brings back those other losses and saying, I really wish I had this other person in my life. I wish my brother was there to help me deal with the death of my mother. And so on one hand, yes, because you have the experience of knowing what's coming, and you know that it's not going to be gone, that grief doesn't end after a month or a year. And on the other hand, it's difficult because it can feel like accumulation of loss. And so what I found is that I really went back and reconnected with the folks who had been there for me during the death of my sibling, dealing with the death of my sibling, and was able to say, all right, we all speak the same language of grief, and reconnect. And I found that to be really helpful. Families can sometimes inadvertently do things that send a message. So, you know, the thing about it is, and I can tell a funny story about this. When we had moved into a new house, my parents had set up a whole room with pictures of my brother. And I was young. I was probably in 3rd or 4th grade. And I was giving people tours of the shrine and charging them $0.25 each. Because they didn't know, I didn't know any other way at that time to talk about my brother who had died, and my parents had, without intending to, had set up a shrine to him. And so what I share with parents about that is that it's so important, and the pictures of someone who has died are absolutely very, very, very precious. And let's make sure together as a family that the pictures of the person who has died and pictures of the people who are still living have equal footing in the household, so that we can continue to say, both of you are important.
And when we give toasts at Thanksgiving and stuff, think about, for the parents that are listening, saying, okay, this is a toast to Scott who died and we really miss him, and it's also a toast to our daughters that are still alive, Heidi, Rebecca, and Heather. I mean, to acknowledge everyone in the family so that we don't feel like the wrong child died, because sometimes we can feel like that if everything is about our brothers or the person that died.
Absolutely, and it's so hard because people who die don't make any new mistakes. And so sometimes it can feel like that person's on a pedestal. And, you know, here I am, I'm going to make some mistakes as a living person. And so I want to make sure that it's okay for me to be human.
There's a question that actually just popped up that I was going to touch on. You know, so many things I wish I had said. How do you get over that? You know, she feels as though she did not have a good relationship with her sister. She feels like she may have failed as a sister because her sister maybe didn't realize how much she cared about her. And I want to touch base on that because the day my brother died, we had gotten into a fight that morning. And so my last words to my brother were not very nice because he was a typical younger sibling, and he was in my stuff, and he was in my face, and he was annoying me. And we had a really good knockdown, drag-out verbal fight. And he went out the door, and I could have cared less. And it took a lot of time, and it took talking with a lot of siblings that had the same experience for me to cope with those feelings, because all I could think of was when he was out there playing with his friends before he was hit by a car, before he was, you know, injured. You know, was he doing these things because he was angry? Was his actions fueled by our fight earlier? Did that cause him to be careless? And was part of that the cause of his accident and why he died? And as far as being able to deal with that and being able to get over that. I don't think you really get over pretty much anything. I think you work through it. I think you manage it. I think you have to come to a place or a moment where you can be at peace with yourself and say, you know what, whether it was that day or whether it was another day, this was the relationship that my sibling and I had. And I know deep down inside my brother knew I loved him. Yes, we fought. Yes, we exchanged harsh words at times. Yes, he stole my stuff, and yes, I stole his right back. But I know deep down inside that he knew that I loved him. And I need to be at peace with that within myself, because if I can't, then I can't stand here and do things in his memory and in his honor to the best of my ability. And that's how I give back, and that's kind of how I've managed to work over the years, coping with the unfinished business of not being able to say I'm sorry to him.
Sibling relationships are so complex. We love them, we fight with them, we make up with them, we have all these things. I mean, that's the sibling relationship, and we invest negative energy in them because we love them. And if we didn't love them, we just ignore them and we just cut them off, and we wouldn't even have these relationships. If there are safe people to argue with, there are safe people to try new roles on with, and it's complicated because oftentimes we don't know they're going to die, and we've had these complicated relationships, and I think that's why it's so important when you've had a sibling loss to reach out to other siblings like Tracy, like Allie, like me, to realize that it's normal to have ups and downs with your siblings. It doesn't mean we didn't love them. We did love them. So I'm glad that you're bringing that up.
Absolutely. And your mind can play tricks on you a little bit after someone dies about saying, I should have been more loving, or I should have been different, or why did I say that as the last thing? And that's where, looking back and saying, one, I didn't know this was the last thing that I was going to say to this person. I probably would not have chosen that to be the last thing that I would have said. And if my mind is saying it should have been perfect all the time, then I have to go back and say, okay, is that realistic? Is that really what sibling relationships look like? No, it's not. Mm-hmm. It would have been weird if you had never had a conflict or you had never had a fight, if everything had gone perfect. My brother was pretty young, so we didn't get to fight with each other, but I felt jealous of the attention. He had cancer, and he was sick for a long time, and I felt jealous. And I can remember saying to him, either get better or go back to where you came from. Like, I don't care which, just do it. And it took me quite a long time to get to the place where I could say to my parents, I think my magic wishes, or I think what I said to my brother might have killed him. I think he might have died because of that. And at that point, my mom was able to say, oh my gosh, I never would have thought that you would have been carrying that on your shoulders all those years. And so I love what you guys said about connecting with other siblings and saying, all right, what was your sibling relationship like? Because I think you would have to scour the earth to find somebody who never fought with their siblings.
Absolutely. We have a comment here that says, so many of the things that you are saying I have felt so much since the death of my sister. Thank you for talking about this. I have felt such guilt that I was such a bad sister to her. I feel like I failed as a sister, that she thinks that I didn't care about her. There were so many things I should have said, so many things I wish I said. How do you get over that?
So say them now. I will tell you that, I did not set out to write a book. I never did. I was writing letters to my brother. In fact, when I was young, I actually mailed them. And my mom, the crying postman, brought them back to my mother, and that's how I ended up getting them back, to be able to put them in a book. But it felt so good. And I've been using Facebook. You had talked about that, Heidi. I've been using Facebook on my mom's Facebook page to write letters, to say things that I either did say out loud to her or to my brother, but that I would want to say again. And I feel so much better after I write it down or after I say it out loud, because I'm not holding it inside of me, and it's no longer eating a hole in my stomach. And I believe that my guardian angels, I believe that my brother and my mother can hear me.
So we have a lot of questions coming in. Let's see. My older sister died 3 years ago from suicide. I got married a year ago. Do you have any thoughts about getting through holidays and other special occasions?
For us, holidays and special occasions, in the early years, it was about finding time, whether it was Christmas, Thanksgiving, his birthday, my birthday. Unfortunately, our birthdays were 2 days apart, which at the time was a curse. It's a blessing now. We found time to have our, what we would call our moment. I don't know how many people can relate to this, but we felt as though after Andrew first died, there was what we called shadows in our family. And it was those moments when you have that utter silence in the room because you know everybody's thinking it and nobody's saying it. So we would have our moments on our holidays, and we would define something about that holiday, whether it was Christmas, Thanksgiving, or a birthday, that was special to Andrew, something that he enjoyed, whether we liked it or not. My brother ate oatmeal. I hate oatmeal. I sucked up and ate oatmeal on Thanksgiving morning every year because that's what my brother would have done. So we found our little moments like that, and we would carve out a little bit of the day and spend that time honoring Andrew, pretending that he was there with us, having our moment, and then it was done. Door closed, chapter closed, and then we focused on who was there, present, and in the moment. And it was very structured in the beginning. Now it's much more relaxed. Now there seems to be more happy thoughts. There seems to be more laughter. There's less tears. Don't get me wrong, we still have our moments. Andrew's anniversary is coming up this weekend, and we'll have our moments. But now we do things almost in jest. Because Andrew was so young when he died, we joke on what would have been his 21st birthday. We all went out and had an adult beverage because we thought that's what he would have done. And then we only come to find out from his school grade math teacher that Andrew used to joke with the kids in school that he had tried beer with my uncle. So go figure. We were obviously 10 years too late.
That's funny.
But that's what we do. And at Christmas every year, I send my mom and my dad one little present, and it's always something in memory of Andrew. It has something to do with either something he liked or something he would always buy them. He would always buy my mother red geraniums on Mother's Day. My mother gets a red geranium on Mother's Day every year and has every year, not only since my brother was alive, but even after my brother passed. That was something that we kept the tradition going and honoring him and her in that aspect as well.
We do something called Thanks for the Little While in our family. And the little while is however long, because honestly, no matter how long you had, it wasn't long enough. And It never would be. And so we will share a story, some stories about the time that we had with my brother, and people will go around and say, something that you remember or something that you wish that you got to experience with him. Because again, we're aging and he's not. And so being able to say, this would have happened. Or when my daughter was born, that I desperately wanted her to meet her uncle, and I wanted her uncle to meet her and to see, because she has his eyes. I wanted the two of them to meet and to know each other. And so that was a story to share. But you're right, Tracy, that we don't let it be the whole holiday. We have a special ornament that we hang on the tree, and we do hang the stockings of every person in our family who's ever been a member of our family. So the other thing that we do on death anniversary, because, I was always this new kid. My brother died in September, and who wants to be the weepy new kid that nobody wants to hang out with? And so for a while I tried to ignore it and just pretend it wasn't happening, and then I'd notice by about noon I was having a rotten day anyway, and so now we just kind of call it out and say this is that day, and we'll light a candle for my brother and do something that we know he enjoyed, and then talk about who he would be now. And the other thing we did for Christmas that my mom had us do, and I loved doing it, and we've continued the tradition, is we will go to the store and we buy a gift for the age that he was when he died, and we donate to a charity. And then we buy a gift for the age that he would be this year, and we donate that to charity.
I know that you were saying that fear comes in two forms.
The first one is that something else bad will happen. We all kind of live in this way of saying, nothing bad's going to happen to me today. And then when your sibling dies or when someone in your family dies, that kind of bubble of protection is popped. And so there is this fear about what else bad will happen. And so you do get to the place where if somebody's a little bit late or they don't call to check in, it's like, oh my gosh, your mind goes straight to, I bet it was something awful. Or my brother died of a brain tumor. I have to tell you, every headache that my daughter had for several years, I had to bite my tongue so that I didn't immediately jump to thinking it was a brain tumor.
Mhm. It's like I got a phone call in the middle of the night that, from my mother that after my brother had died, and so when the phone rings in the middle of the night, it's like, oh my gosh, did someone die? So like you said,
exactly.
we go to those places in our heads because it's happened to us.
But then there's the flip side, and that's the fear that nothing good will ever happen again. And so this thing that says, whether I fought with my brother or whether we had fabulous moments, or probably it was a mix of a little bit of each, maybe the best times of my life have already passed by, which is pretty tough when you're talking about being young when that happens, or really any time in your life to say, is anything else good going to happen? And I think that's where, for me, I've had to deliberately go and choose to find the legacy of my brother's life, to say, how do I carry forward, not go and be who he was going to be, but how do I carry forward what he taught me about smiling, about living my life to the fullest, about understanding life is short, and how do I make sure that something good will happen again?
We have another question, which I really liked. It says, my sister is getting married in June, and we are trying to think of ways to honor my brother without making it a very, very sad, almost second funeral. We don't want to make it a sad, almost second funeral. We definitely want to commemorate him in beautiful ways. We just don't know exactly how.
At my wedding, my husband's father had died when he was young, and my brother had died. We put white flowers in the bouquet, and the men's boutonnieres were white roses. And then we put a note about it in the wedding program that said the white flowers are there to honor our loved ones who are with us in spirit, but who have gone on to heaven before us. And we brought a pair of my husband's father's shoes were in the front pew, and my brother's teddy bear was in the front pew. And so they sat right where the family would sit. And we knew they were there. We didn't make a big deal out of it. But you literally standing at the altar, turning back, it was the first thing you saw.
I was at a wedding of a fellow TCF sibling who wanted to do the same thing. She wanted to honor her brother and did not want anything that was going to, as she puts it, make her mother bawl in hysterics. So what she decided to do was she actually had a candle in a little lantern, and at the beginning of the service, when the bridal party was, walking down the little aisleway, because she was outside, so it wasn't a church. They're walking down the little aisleway. Myself, who was in the bridal party, walked over to the candle, and I lit it. And then I just walked and took my place, and that was it. And it was small, and it was simple. And same thing, Allie, in her program, there was a little notation in there she had put in the program for everyone, talking about her brother, her grandmother, other people that weren't there to be a part of the service, and that's what the candle was representing.
I think the word is balance. It really goes to finding the right balance between honoring the person and also having this be, it's a day of celebration. A wedding is, of course, a new beginning and something exciting and wonderful too. And so making sure that the balance feels right to the bride and groom.
So we have another question. I often wonder, how can I feel okay continuing to live my life when she cannot live hers? I was engaged recently and feel that I have no right to get married because my sister is gone. She isn't there. She doesn't have a life that I don't deserve to live.
I guess I would say, why not? My question to the person asking that question would be, why not? Your sister, if your sister was here, would she look at you right now and turn around and say, why not? Like, absolutely. You absolutely. It's that boils down to someone, in my opinion, who is just feeling as though they can't connect with someone else who might be feeling the same thing. So for that person, I say, hey, guess what? We've all been there. We've all felt that. I felt, because my brother and I had a fight that morning, I felt as though I had caused his accident. I felt as though that I didn't deserve to be here, that I should have been the one that had died and not him, because I was the big, bad, mean older sister. And how am I supposed to go on and live with myself now? So I think everybody feels a sliver of that at some point in time. I think it's natural. I think it's normal. I think it's human. But I think also what you need to grasp onto is that if you continue to live your life and you continue to do things in your life, whatever they may be, you'll be here to remind people that she did live. And that's the most important thing. The most important thing is to remind people that she was here. She's a part of you. She's a part of your memories. She's a part of everything you've created to this point in your life.
We keep the memories alive. We pass down stories to our friends, to our kids, to our relatives about our siblings. So, yeah,
so
were you going to say something, Allie?
You introduced your sibling and the stories of your sibling to the new people who didn't know you when they were alive. And that's how you keep them alive and pull their legacy forward.
Allie and Tracy, let's talk about how grief affects relationships, present and future.
So a big one is, how do you tell new people the story of your sibling? You know, is it just something you'd talk about on the first date? You know, how do you, and you got to plan this ahead of time. How will I talk to new people about my brother? How do I introduce that person? My husband and I, when we were first dating, knew it was getting serious when we went to go meet my brother at his cemetery, and then my husband took me to meet his dad at that cemetery, and that's when we knew it was getting serious.
For me, because of where we grew up in our town, like I mentioned earlier, with my dad and his career and whatnot, everybody kind of knew my family. So, you know, people knew my brother. They knew of the accident. They knew of the situation. So in those early years, it was affecting my relationships with my friends in school because they couldn't understand why I was reacting the way I was reacting. It was affecting my relationship with my parents because my parents were extremely overprotective. When we talked about that fear earlier of something bad is going to happen, my parents cornered the market on that. And I had the proverbial reaction of, nothing good is ever going to come of my life because of the fact that my parents are smothering me. They're not letting me live. They're not letting me grow up. I'm going to be single. I'm going to be an old lady with 14 cats, and nobody's going to love me. So that's how it affected me in the beginning. And then as I started to sprout my wings and get involved and do more with other siblings and get more involved through Compassionate Friends, I found that my relationships were starting to change in the future. I found myself wanting to be around people who were going to let me talk about my brother, because I wanted people to know about my brother, and I wanted people to understand that he is a vital part of my core and the fiber of who I am. And yes, he may have only been 10, but the stupid little things that he did affect me to this day. I'm totally convinced that my brother set me up with the person that I am currently dating. And I am totally 100% convinced that there was no question whatsoever that this was finally the right person for me, because there are so many similarities, and he's willing to sit and listen to me talk about my brother. And I finally have someone that wants to know more.
When it came time with my husband and I to think about children, it really came up about, I didn't want to have only one. I didn't want to have all my eggs in one basket. But then also when we had a daughter first, I was afraid of what if we had a little boy second, and then would that little boy die? I mean, it was so interesting how it really did go into the math and the thinking about how I was going to move forward with my own family many, many years later after my brother died. And he was absolutely a part of that discussion. In a way, honestly, he wouldn't have been if he were still alive. I probably wouldn't have included him in a discussion about how many kids I was going to have, but he was absolutely a part of that discussion and a part of the fears and the thoughts and the process that we went through.
Death does not end a relationship. So love survives, and love goes on forever, and we have a relationship. It's in a different, our bonds continue, but in a different way.
Really, with the slide, what we were talking about is finding hope. That hope seems like such a faraway thing, especially at first, but then there are days still when something kind of sneaks up on me and I feel pain and I say, when am I ever going to feel better? When is this ever going to feel good? And what I know is that I have to ride those moments kind of like a wave, that if I try to push them aside, they wait for me patiently, and they gather interest, if you will, to where, if you push it aside for too long, it comes back full force, kind of whacks you from the side. What I know is that I have to allow myself to grieve, and I have to go through those moments and let the tears come when they need to, and then reach out and receive support from others to really understand what I'm going through. And it goes back to that relationship piece, but also in finding hope about if there are people who are judging how you're grieving, if there are people who don't allow you to talk about your brother or your sister, then it's okay to say, you're somebody I probably don't want to reach out to when I'm having a tough moment. I need to find some people who can allow me to tell that story, who can allow me to have the tough moment that I have. And that's part of finding hope, is allowing yourself to grieve.
When I started the Open to Hope Foundation, we called it Open to Hope because some of you out there don't have hope yet, and that's okay, but we just wanted people to be open to the idea that maybe they could eventually just get a little tiny glimmer of hope. And I always say, if you've lost hope, lean on ours. Lean on mine and Tracy's and Allie's, because we've been where you've been. I've been in a place where not only did I not know how I was going to survive, I honestly didn't believe I wanted to. And today, I'm in a place of great hope, and that's by connecting, like you all are, with other people who have walked this walk and who have been on this journey and made it. And like Compassionate Friend says, we've made it, and so can you.
Find hope by finding people who can acknowledge what you're going through and who can be there for you and allow you to tell the story 20 times if you need to.
We have a question. It says, when I have children, how do I explain to my children about their uncle? I want them to know him.
Wonderful question. I love this question. So we talk about Uncle Austin in my house fairly often, and my daughter is now, oh my goodness, my daughter's almost 16. And so we talked a little bit about saying, hopefully Uncle Austin's watching out for you when you're driving, when you're going out to get that driver's license. And so from the moment that my daughter was old enough to be told stories, so right away we talked about her Uncle Austin, and we told stories, and we said, you have a special guardian angel. And I showed her pictures of him, and we giggled and laughed about some of the funny things that he did. And so we just talked very normally about him. And my daughter at 3 years old said to somebody, well, I have an angel uncle. So by making it just a real normal part of what we do, my daughter didn't think it was odd or weird or anything. And so he's a rich part of her life, even though they haven't had an opportunity to meet.
I agree with you, Allie. My children know their Uncle Scott, and they've never physically met him, but they know him through all the funny childhood memories I share with them. And also when they remind me of him, they might do something or say something, I'd be like, oh my gosh, that reminds me so much of your Uncle Scott.
So we've talked a little bit about working through your baggage. It's so important to acknowledge that no relationship is perfect and to find ways to forgive yourself, so that it doesn't become a stumbling block and something that would cause you to be stuck in your grief. And we've talked a little bit about finding a way to carry forward the legacy and define what role you want them to play in your life, not to overshadow who you are, but to say, how do I enhance that? How do I share a little bit of my brother with everybody that I know, whether they know that I'm sharing it or not. I may not necessarily say that pay it forward is something that I learned from my brother, but I may be paying it forward for someone. So when I pay someone's toll once a month, I don't necessarily say, and tell them it's because of my brother, but I know. And then we talked a little bit about plan ways to introduce new people in your life to the memory of your sibling. Because if you have a plan, then you won't be so nervous about what's going to happen or how you'll do it. And then we talked a lot when someone asked the question about how to involve them in events such as weddings. There's so many great ideas. There's really no wrong way to do it. It's got to be something that feels like it honors the person and that makes sense for the people whose special day it is. But there's no wrong way to do it. And I think the last thing that we can share about hope is that Hope isn't the absence of pain. Hope doesn't mean that you wake up one day and you're not feeling sad, or that you don't have a moment where you're thinking, wow, I really wish my sibling was there. Hope is the memory of love given and love received. They loved us. We knew them. Isn't that wonderful? That's a celebration. Hope is every time you share a story of your sibling with someone who didn't get a chance to meet them. And it's found every time you hear something he or she would have said coming out of your mouth. Hope is when you remember first that they lived. And that's something I wanted to share with you that my mom said a lot.
And we don't get over our brothers and sisters, nor would we want to. We learn to live without them. We are who we are today because they were in our lives. And we learn how to live with them in new and different ways, and to continue those bonds in new and different ways.
And Heidi, I want to say something that I think is just so important. I didn't lose my brother. He's with me. He is the part of love that never goes away. It lives with me, and he lives on through me. And so I don't talk about loss. I don't talk about having lost him. My brother died, but he is not lost to me.
And to add on to that, when we talk about closure, closure is for bank accounts, not love accounts. The sibling bond is extremely strong.
The only thing I can add to everybody who's listening, whether you're a sibling or whether you're a parent, just keep talking. Talking is so important. For those parents that have surviving children that you say, I don't know what they're doing, I don't know what they're dealing, I don't know how to help them, just keep talking. And they may storm away from you and they may say, get lost, I don't want to share this with you, you don't understand. And you probably don't, but just keep talking. Just keep those lines of communication open. For the siblings that are listening and you feel as though you've got nobody out there that gets it, we get it. So keep talking to us, and we will put you in touch with more people and more people and more people. And before you know it, you'll have more brothers and sisters than you ever possibly imagined that will all get it, and they will keep talking. That's the best thing I can say. It's the one thing that I learned very early on in this process. Allie and I have been talking for 20 plus years, and as she mentioned earlier, in times of need, whether it's your siblings, your parents, your dog, your birth of your child, your wedding, whatever milestone you're coming across, there's nothing like a fellow sibling that gets it. So just keep talking.
Thank you so much. I want to thank Tracy Milne and Allie Sims Franklin tonight. They give so much to the siblings out there, and if you would like to connect with other siblings, please come to a Compassionate Friends conference or join the Sounds of the Siblings Compassionate Friends Facebook page.